Discussion? All in favor of that motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. We're out of executive session. There was no action taken in executive session. Mr. Malinowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to make a motion. That motion is prefaced with the fact that this council is responsible for the transportation penny that the citizens of this county voted on, and we need to protect that transportation penny. We therefore authorize the Richland County legal representative to take whatever steps are necessary, including litigation, to protect that transportation penny.
Second.
Got a motion on the table. It's been properly second.
Mr.
Any
Chairman.
discussion? Mr. Manning.
I'd like to be considered a co-maker of that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Manning.
And I'd like to be a co-maker of it as well.
Thank you, Ms. Dickerson. Okay, any more discussion? All in favor of that motion signify by raising your hand.
In favor: Malinowski, Dixon, Jackson, Pierce, Rush, Livingston, Dickerson, Manning, Jeter.
Any opposed, like sign?
Opposed: Rose.
That motion carries.
Mr. Chair,
Mr.
the
Jackson.
motion.
Yep.
I move that if the funds are withheld by the Department of Revenue, we set aside $50.9 million to pay the bond participation note if needed in October.
Second.
That's the motion on the table. It's been properly second.
Point of clarification.
Mr. Pierce.
So the 50 million would come out of the penny money that is currently set aside?
Yes. That we already have.
Would not come out of the general fund?
No.
Thank you.
We'll just set aside.
Thank you, Mr. Pierce. Any more discussion? All in favor of that motion signify by raising your hand.
In favor: Rose, Malinowski, Dixon, Jackson, Pierce, Rush, Livingston, Dickerson, Manning, Jeter.
Any opposed, like sign? That motion carries. Thank you, Mr.
Chairman,
Jackson.
I'd like to move for reconsideration.
We got a
of the last
motion
two
for
items.
reconsideration. It's been properly second. Any discussion?
Which motion?
Which items?
The last two.
Okay.
The last two motions.
All in favor of reconsider?
Point of order.
Yo,
Mr. Smith, can we reconsider two motions at one time, or we have to?
We can do them individually.
It was, well, you actually probably, since they were made individually, you probably need to do them individually.
Mr. Chairman, I move to divide my question.
Second.
all right.
I just think we
Got a motion for, to divide
The first item.
the reconsideration of the first item. All in favor of reconsideration signify by saying aye. Any opposed?
Nay.
That motion fails. To the second item. All in favor of reconsideration signify by saying aye. Any opposed?
Nay.
That motion fails.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Next, we have citizens' input for items on the agenda not requiring a public hearing.
Not requiring.
All right. Have one citizen sign up to speak, Mr. Jim Felder. Mr. Felder, if you can come forward, state your name and address for the record, and you have up to 2 minutes to speak.
My name is Jim Felder. I live at 1825 St. Julian Place, Columbia. And I'm here today in my capacity as president of the South Carolina Voter Education Project, an organization that's been around since 1967, following the 65 Voting Rights Act, when we sought to get minorities registered and elected to office. At that time, there were only 10,000 registered voters in Richland County. Today, there were, 50,000. So anyway, we've done that job. Today, I'm here talking about minority businesses and them doing business with the county. The issue you just talked about was what I wanted to talk about, so I really can take my seat. I was here to encourage you not to be bullied by the Department of Revenue. You know, the last time I checked, it was the state treasurer that releases the funds back to the county. Is that correct? Once they've been collected. The State Department of Revenue is a collection agency, and they cannot dictate to this council or any other entity what to do with funds. They can audit and make suggestions and so forth. So now that you have done that, that's why I'm here to encourage you to stand your ground, do whatever is necessary legally to defend this penny tax program. Thank you.
That concludes our citizens' input. Next, we have the report of the county administrator for Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of council. Item A on my list, the Richland 101 graduation. I know some of you, I believe, attended the actual graduation ceremony last week or late last week. For our Richland 101 participants for this session, which has gone over the last several weeks, and I'm going to ask Beverly Harris, our Public Information Director, to say just a couple of words, and I think maybe introduce one or two of the graduates who may also say a word or two.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. I'm Beverly Harris, Public Information Office. Public Information Director. Members of council, just want to let you know we wrapped up the spring edition of Richland 101 last week. We held a graduation ceremony at one of our millage agencies, Riverbank Zoo. I'd like to thank Chairman Rush for speaking to the class at that event. We appreciated that. We had about 25 people go through the class this year representing various parts of the county, mostly Columbia, but we did have representation from Blythewood and Hopkins. And one of our speakers tonight is actually from Hopkins, Miss Suzanne Wright. She was a question-asking machine throughout the class and just really challenged our directors with some of the questions she posed. And our second speaker is Miss Sabrina Todd from Columbia, somebody that council has become very familiar with since the October flood. So, ladies.
Hi, I'm Sabrina Todd. My address is 1312 Glenhaven Drive. My husband and I participated in the recent class of Richland 101. It was an excellent program. Ms. Harris and the Public Information Office staff, they were very helpful and organized. The speakers were engaged and very knowledgeable. The program was well thought out and very informative. We enjoyed it very much. The class had a lot of questions and learned a lot. We learned a lot. It was a lovely reception, and thank you, Chairman Rush, for attending. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Suzanne Wright. My husband and I and family reside at 2940 South Partridge Circle in Hopkins. Richland 101 puts a face on the government. Richland 101 put a face on us, the constituents. Richland 101 shows what government can do. So we have the ideas of what we can ask. So we know what to ask. So we know what to do. Richland 101 shows that we are responsible for our government and they're doing and getting done. Richland 101 shows how we can spread the word to others about all the above. So in conclusion, I'd like to say that I had to learn about all the things in here before I could even ask questions. I mean, I didn't know all this stuff in here. Thank you very much. And seriously, government cares because we, the people, together with you all, the constituents, are the government. Thank you for the time, taking the time for Richland 101. Thanks for doing so in a kind and generous way.
Thank you, ladies. I'd just like to wrap up by saying that we're going to follow up this Richland 101 with a special edition starting in August. We'll be looking at capital improvements around the county. So we'll be looking at the coroner's office, the library, and also the Decker Center. We'll have more information coming forth with that.
All right.
Thank you, Ms. Harris. Mr. Chairman and members of council, I want to thank Ms. Harris, especially, and to her staff, are doing an excellent job over the last several weeks with the 101 program. As always in the past, the program went off without a hitch. I think everyone who participated has ranted about how well everything was organized and what they learned. So we appreciate the citizens' participation. And again, I want to thank the Public Information Office for coordinating all of the events. And lastly, Mr. Chair, from my report, and I believe you, Mr. Rush, are going to present a proclamation to our Public Works Director, Ishmael Osbeck. But while the two of them go to the podium, I just want to say a couple of words. And again, I don't want to repeat what or say what Mr. Rush is about to read from the proclamation, but I do want to thank Mr. Osbeck and the entire Public Works Department for many things and the improvement that the department has achieved over the last few years. They've done a tremendous job, I think, and especially since October when the flood occurred. I know Ishmael and his staff were out every day of the week for months, and I know that personally because I was on the phone with them and on email and on text communication with them. So I know they were out there, and I saw it firsthand. So they did a tremendous job during the flood, which was a very difficult time, as everyone knows, for all of us. And I appreciate what they did, especially during that period. And I just want to thank Mr. Osbeck for that period. And again, I'll let Mr. Rush take it from there.
All right. Thank you, Mr. McDonald, and to Mr. Osbeck, and to your staff, the members of the Public Works Department. A proclamation honoring the National Public Works Week, whereas public works services provide in our community are an integral part of our citizens' daily lives, and whereas the health, safety, and comfort of this community greatly depends on their facilities and services. Whereas the quality and effectiveness of these facilities, as well as their planning, design, maintenance, and construction, is vitally dependent upon the efforts, skills of local public works officials. And whereas the efficiency of the qualified, dedicated personnel who staff public works departments is heavily influenced by the people's attitude, understanding of the works they perform. And now, therefore, Richland County Council proclaimed the week of May 15th through May 21st, 2016 as National Public Works Week. Richland County Council calls on all citizens and civic organizations to acquaint themselves with the challenges involved in providing public works services and to recognize the contribution which the public works staff make each day to our health, safety, and comfort. So, Mr. Osbeck, I want to congratulate you, and we honor you for Public Works Week. Let's go up front. Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. If you allow me my 2 minutes, I'd like to thank on behalf of over 100 strong men and women dedicated every day for public works. That's the only glory that they're looking for. And on their behalf, I really appreciate your support throughout the year. You've always supported every and each one of you. And also, Mr. McDonald, administration has been very, very supportive throughout the whole ordeal we went through. And that's all a teamwork. This was a small representation of our public works over here. Couldn't bring them all. It represents, we are a large group, so we are organized into several divisions from engineering, which includes flood and transportation. Andrea got recognized last time, as you heard, she was in the middle of it as roads and drainage while they repaired almost 300 roads. And again, I would like to thank all our partner sister departments. Whenever I say that, Rob is going to look at me because I'm going to call him my sister again. Transportation department, planning department, solid waste, building services. I don't want to leave out anybody as far as fleet, grounds, building maintenance. It's all a teamwork, all the departments. So we really appreciate the recognition and invite you to our barbecue on the 18th of May, and you will get special invitations as all of you. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, so does
Ms.
this mean we
Dixon?
can't give additional work during that week?
I think they still ask for it, don't they? Thank you, Mr. Osbeck. Mr. McDonald.
That completes my report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. Next, we have the report of the Clerk of Council, Ms. Only.
Yes, sir. I have two reminders about upcoming budget meetings. The budget work sessions here at the County Council building will be from 4 to 6 on May the 5th, and that will be the general fund. May 12th, the special revenue, enterprise, and millage agencies, and then May 17th will be grants. And then we have the special meeting in Lower Richland for the District 10 citizens, and that's May the 11th at 6 p.m. at Hopkins Park. My last item is a funding request from Black Pages. They're requesting a full-page ad, and they will invoice us actually for this item in the new fiscal year.
Okay. What is the request?
It is for $3,450.
Thought we already provided that.
What kind of ad?
It's a full-page ad for Black Pages.
Ms. Dickerson.
A full-page ad costs how much?
$3,450.
Mr. Pierce.
I thought we provided a substantial amount of funding for them already through the,
We do give them hospitality tax money.
yeah.
Mr. Chair,
Yep.
but you said they're gonna invoice us for this in the next fiscal year,
Yes, ma'am.
huh? Is that the average pay for an ad? $3,000, I've never in my life seen $3,000 for an ad. That's how much a full-page ad costs?
Ma'am,
And that's what the ad was last year as well.
It was that much, but it didn't come out of their budget? It wasn't included in their budget? We did a special line item for $3,000 for an ad?
ma'am.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Dickerson.
Move on.
Any more discussion? Are we going forward with the ad?
No, you have to vote.
Huh?
Somebody
I'm
make a
asking.
motion
Yeah, the vote.
to vote.
Is there a motion?
It dies, there's no motion.
Mr., there wasn't a motion put up. Mr. Jeter.
I make a motion that we do not support spending the $3,000 for ads with Black Pages, and if they can find it out,
I second
we
it.
already give to them.
All right, that's the motion on the table.
Second.
It's been properly second. Discussion. You said not to, right?
Not to.
Okay.
All in favor of that motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. Ms. Only.
Can we do we
I
need
think
to
we're good.
reconsider that?
No, I think it's good.
Okay, thank you.
That-
Ms. Only.
that completes
Thank you,
my
Ms. Only.
report.
Next, we have the report of the chair. One item we have is the search committee, which will be in executive session, but the chair will recognize Ms. Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Last week, we recognized Denim Day. Actually, the 27th of April, we recognized Denim Day. And I want to thank Mr. Manning for his support on human trafficking as he spearheads that while I spearhead sexual assault. So we're going to do a little clipping on the participation throughout the county. And I must thank everyone for their support throughout Richland County as well as Fort Jackson.
Want to see Manning in tape.
Like I said, I really appreciate all the departments for participating in that event. We should look forward in doing that next year. One last item, Mr. Chair, and I promise I won't take up your time. I know we won't be meeting for the rest of this week, so I'm going to go ahead and jump to the gun. To all the mothers, grandmother, aunts, niece, and sisters, happy Mother's Day.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Dixon. That concludes my report. Next, we have the open and closing of public hearing. Item 12A, an ordinance amending the fiscal year 2015-16 general fund annual budget to appropriate $62,751 of general fund balance to fund the cost for a board of voter registration and election commission associated to conduct the special election for a vacated District 10 seat. That public hearings.
Mr. Chairman, that's the amount, but, okay. There was a question about the amount of money.
Yeah. Remember it went up there.
So if the money is subsequently, well, it's a point of order. If it's subsequently demonstrated that this is the wrong amount of money, we're going to have another public hearing. Mr. Smith?
It's my understanding, Mr. Pierce, that there was a question about whether or not the $62,751 was the correct amount. And I thought that the motion was to request some additional information regarding that amount, and that information was supposed to be brought back, I think, to the body. That's my recollection.
All right, Mr. McDonald.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Smith is exactly right. The number, the 62,751, is what was approved on second reading. There was a request at that time from the elections director that amount be adjusted to 86,362. The council did not agree to do that at that meeting because you did ask for additional information, which Mr. Self did provide and is in the agenda as backup material. So I believe, and I'm not the parliamentarian, but I believe you could adjust, if the council wished to do so, the amount to 86,362 without having to reschedule a second public hearing.
This is a public hearing, right?
Yeah, this is just a public hearing. Okay. Thanks for the clarity. The public hearing is open. There's no one signed up to speak. That public hearing is now closed. Next, we have approval of consent items, items 13 through 23.
Move to approve.
Got a motion for approval. It's been properly seconded. Any discussion? All in favor of that motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. Next, we have item 29.
23A.
Mr. Pierce.
Mr. Chairman, this is an item brought forward from the administration.
29. Yep. Move forward, Mr. Pierce. You have the floor.
This is an item brought forward from the Administration and Finance Committee without recommendation. It was reported by the Chief Financial Officer that we had, I believe it was three departments? Three departments.
Yes.
Which are projecting overages on their budget for the current fiscal year. The committee did hear from Mr. Myers, the director of the Alvin S. Glenn Detention Center, who in detail went over the result, the cause of his overage. And I believe that's why Judge Simon, who I believe must have had to leave, he wanted to speak to that since the overage is significantly related to the 24-hour bond court, if you'll remember, that started last year. And the bond court, we spent, I believe, $218,000 on the bond court, 24-hour bond court. The actual savings from that bond court, Mr. Myers projected at about $5,000. And because of that, his budget is over. In addition to that, we did not hear from the coroner. The coroner is still here. There was some concerns about the coroner's personnel budget. So That was carried over for today. So this item is before you simply as a, the recommendation, I guess, would be to what, Mr. McDonald? To cover the overage
Yes, sir, that would be correct.
with general fund balance?
Yes.
With the fund balance. So there is no recommendation from the committee. So it's open for any motion that anyone would need to make, Mr. Chairman.
Entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair,
Ms. Dickerson.
do we have to have a motion for discussion? Or can I discuss before I get a motion?
It would be good to have one.
I make a motion for approval for discussion.
We got a motion for approval.
Second.
It's been properly second. Discussion, Ms. Dickerson.
One of the things that was brought to me, the person from the detention center explained his position, and I fully understand it. With one of the big, strong things that he said was a very big overage with his water department, and he made that really part of his presentation, is that they had some leakage that they were not basically aware of, and it caused the city to really charge them a lot of money for that. So that's one portion that I can understand. The other portion I couldn't understand, because I remember when we decided to go to a 24-hour bond hearing from the magistrate, we were supposed to be able to save funds. Now it looks like the funds have been increased. So now I don't have an explanation from the magistrate. So was this be a first reading? Huh?
Yes.
First reading. I made the motion for approval, and I would like to have a conversation with the magistrate on how the change caused us to have caused his department to have this large need for additional funds, especially when he said last year that a 24-hour bond thing was supposed to help us reduce it, and seemed like it has increased. And from the detention, seemed like we didn't save but $5. So that's the truth, huh?
They think 5,000, I think.
Well, whatever.
Yeah, it's a very small amount.
It's a very small amount compared to what we said. So that's my motion to approve, with this being the first reading. Can we do it by
All right.
time?
It's still the motion's still on the floor. Any more discussion?
Okay.
Mr. Rose.
I just want to be clear, this isn't prospective, it's retroactive, right? This is money that's already been spent that we have to cover. And so then I would also agree with the motion to approve and just say we get some clarity going forward to see if this is something we want to
Second
continue doing.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Rose. Mr. Malinowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And also, Mr. Meyer spoke to us last time, we now have figures written down in front of us. And when we're talking about needing approximately $200,000 additional to cover water because of some system they have that would not shut off during the flooding. I think we need to find out if that system can be improved, because $200,000 is an awful lot of extra money for water for just a one-time, 1 month bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Malinowski. Mr. Pierce.
Just a comment, and I appreciate Mr. Rose's remark, it is retroactive. I think, though, with the budget coming up, that it would be very critical to actually take a look at those expenses, Ms. Dickerson?
Yes, sir.
That you're asking to, and the other has to do with the coroner's office, which now is consistently running over because of the large increase in the number of deaths in the county and the demand for autopsies on those people. He also has some other challenges that he's going to be working on, but I would encourage everyone to let's take a look at those during the budget year, see what we can do to avoid this in the future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's it. Mr. Malinowski.
Yeah, and one last thing, I don't know if it is too late, Mr. McDonald, with your figures on flood-related matters. This is an example of how other outside groups need to have kept you informed at that time. This possibly could have been and maybe still can be a recouped loss. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Malinowski. Any more discussion? All in favor, this is a first reading item. All in favor of that motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. Next, we have third reading items. An ordinance amending the fiscal year 2015.
Wait a minute.
We're on item 24.
Remember, we moved that
We moved
item?
that item up during the adoption of the agenda. So we're,
It's 20.
29 was actually under 23. 23A. Okay, all right. Item 24, third reading item. An ordinance amending the fiscal year 2015-16 general fund annual budget to appropriate $62,751 to increase funding to the Board of Voter Registration and Elections Department plans to conduct scheduled elections, operating equipment, and staff. Chair, entertain a motion.
You need to say for District 10.
Oh, also, I'm sorry, for the vacated District 10 seat.
All right.
Chair, entertain a motion. Got a motion for approval? It's been properly second. Any discussion? Ms. Dickerson?
Now, we approving 62,751 or 86,000? 62,751.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dickerson. Mr. Pierce?
I can't believe I'm saying this, but is that the actual cost of the election, or is there a different cost for the actual cost of the election?
Mr. Pierce,
Mr.
I assume that question's for me, and
Yes, it is. I think Mr. Self left.
he may have. I know he was here earlier, but
Yeah, a minute ago.
based on information, and that's a good question, Mr. Pierce, as painful as it may be, it's a good question. Based on information from Mr. Self, the actual cost, if both the primary and the runoff have to occur, would be $86,362. So it is more than the $62,000 number.
Thank you, Mr. Pierce. Mr. Malinowski? Got you, Jack.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, with Mr. Self gone, I guess we won't get many answers. Maybe Mr. McDonald knows the answer, but page 158 of our agenda, it tells us the types of managers. I would still like to know additional information on a poll manager. Is this merely a title given to these workers? Because, you know, what's the definition? Are they really just a poll worker versus a poll manager? Because again, we've got 82 managers and 23 workers according to this. Yes.
They sent us a note that the voter registration booklet that is, right? That's what they're called.
That's what I'm asking. What's the definition? I got what he just sent us
The
here.
definition is in the voters registration book provided by the state. And they sent us an email describing the meaning or the definition of those positions.
Okay. All right, Mr. Malinowski, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Apparently, I didn't get that one, but how about this one then? It says a poll manager's assistant. One 16 or 17-year-old assistant may be appointed for every 2 poll managers. Why 16 or 17? That somewhat seems discriminatory to me. Could he put in, could somebody put in there, we want somebody that's 58 or 59 years old? I just don't understand why that age. But again, I ask these questions, and I'll have to say they're rhetorical, since I don't think we have anybody here that can provide us that information. Again, it shows on page 159, and I realize that this is these are the rules here. It says that you need 3 managers for the first 500 electors registered to vote. But then you only need 1 for each additional 500. So are the first 500 a problem that we need 3 people to handle them, but each 500 thereafter, we only need 1? Again, I don't know if these are state laws or where they come from. And if you look at the figures that were provided, that were redlined on page 161, all the way to the right column, they've struck through all of the personnel costs and just given us one total of $55,500. When in actuality, if you add it up, it's a different figure than that figure. So again, they still don't have their math right. And over on page 163, maybe Mr. McDonald knows this one, where it says total in that first column. Precinct name, polling location, address, total. Is that the total number of registered voters? Because if it is, in precinct code 126, which is Ward 26, it says they've got 3 voters. They're going to have 4 primary workers and 2 machines to handle those 3 voters. I don't get it.
Yes.
So I'd still like additional clarification, and for that reason, I'll vote no, even though I know we need to pay for this election. I'm all for paying for it, but I just think we need somebody with a little better accounting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Malinowski. Mr. Livingston.
Let me just quickly say, I'm not an election expert and never conducted one before, so I have no idea what one would cost. But I do want to make sure that there's an election and it's done properly. So therefore, I would like to make a substitute motion that we fund this in the up to $86,362 and ask for an itemized list of expenditures once it's conducted. Is my motion, Mr. Chair.
Second.
Okay. I got a motion on the table. It's been properly second. Discussion. I've got Mr. Jackson and then Dickerson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the question of the $86,362, I think the finance director sent us, there's an email was sent to all of us with an explanation of how they arrived at that number. And I think Mr. Sepp got information from the accounting department and how to do the calculations. That was sent to us, and that was pretty self-explanatory. As for the amount of workers and whether they're called managers or why were they called managers, that's in the voter registration booklet of rules. And we were sent an email explaining the amount of managers per precinct, which is based on the volume or the amount of people in each district. I think the state legislators changed the rules or provided the rules, but that for how much 500 people per precinct, the number of poll managers increased. And I think the total was 182, or I can't remember the exact figure. But he sent us an email explaining everything, and I understand it clearly, and we have no choice. I just want to make sure that no precincts or no area or district, right, is treated unfairly. I just want to make sure we have the right amount of workers so we can have an election so it will be fair and just to all the citizens in those areas. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Ms. Dickerson.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Livingston made a substitute, this substitute motion was to fund the voter registration up to $86,362. In this ordinance that we are looking at, we were looking at $62,751, a difference of $23,611. So what do we do to balance this out? I mean, is this going to fund balance?
It'll all come, it'll increase the amount we take out of fund balance.
And this would, now, Mr. Livingston's motion, this is going to include the special if we have to do a runoff. Huh?
If I may, Mr. Chairman, yes, ma'am, Ms. Dickerson. The 86,000 represents potentially 2 elections, the primary and then the runoff. Now, and I think Mr. Livingston made a good point with the up to
I want to speak to you.
comment, because if the primary election determines a winner, the runoff, of course, would not be necessary. So about half of that 86,000 would not need to be spent because there would not need to be a second election.
Why you say not half of it? I mean, what's the 62?
Clarification.
Not half of it, or okay, so the 62 is for just the regular special election.
No, ma'am. No, no, ma'am. The 62.
Read this wrong.
No, the 62 was the original estimate from the elections director as to what both the primary and the runoff would cost.
So the $23,611 was like they didn't get the math right.
That there needed to be an adjustment for a few reasons. I think some the benefits, for example, for the employees were not included in the 62, and some of the other associated costs were not included in the 62. So when you added those costs in, the amount went up from 62 to 86,000. But what I was saying a minute ago is, if only the primary is needed and the primary determines a winner, then there would not need to be a runoff. So approximately half of that 86,000 would not be needed because there would not need to be a second election.
Just quickly clarify the motion.
Clarify your motion.
And again, Mr. McDonald is right. That's why I said up to that amount, because we don't know whether or not there would be a runoff election, et cetera. And also, too, remember, part of my motion said also, too, it's contingent upon an itemized account of what was expended.
All right, that makes
So
sense.
that way, we'll know exactly how much of that amount would need to be appropriated.
All right. Thank you, Mr.
That answered my question.
Okay.
Thank you.
You done, Ms. Dickerson?
And I want the accounting, ran 3/4 through Excel.
Thank you, Mr. Dickerson. Mr. Rose.
Yeah, I guess, I'm disappointed Mr. Self isn't here to answer the questions, but I guess, obviously, I don't run elections, don't know how to. First reading, this council was given a budget, saying, here's what it's gonna cost, $62,000. First reading was given. Then we come to second reading, and staff, not the elections office, but staff stands up and says, the election office has told us that there was some type of misaccounting, and now we're at roughly $20,000 more, so we're at 80 some odd dollars. That wasn't spoken to by the elections office, and I look at the figures on page, am I seeing this right, Mr. McDonald, on page 160? They're saying for a runoff that we're looking at $40,000, roughly $40,000. A little over, actually, $40,500. And that's mainly for staff, correct?
Yes, Mr. Rose.
The runoff date would be on June 14th, correct?
I believe that's correct.
That's the state, that's the primary day, where they would there's already elections ongoing.
Right.
I'm having a hard time understanding, and I'd like to ask these questions. Here we are at third reading. I'm assuming the polling places are already going to be staffed on the primary date. But again, we get these figures, particularly at first reading, saying, here's the cost. And then we find out that there's an error in the accounting somewhat, and that's what causes me concern. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Rose. Mr. Jackson.
Oh, I thought Mr. McDonald had a
Oh, yeah.
response.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
I
Mr.
just wanted to try to answer at least part of Mr. Rose's question about the dual elections going on the same date. Mr. Rose is exactly right. We asked the same question of Mr. Self as well, and if there was already going to be the primary going on, why could you not have the special or the runoff at the same time and with the same equipment and with the same personnel that you do the primary? And according to Mr. Self, the runoff had to be separate and apart from the primary and had to be considered and treated just like a separate election. So I did ask that question, Mr. Rose, and that is the answer that I got from Mr. Self.
Clarification.
Mr. Malinowski, just clarification.
So, Mr. McDonald, you're saying that people are going to have to get in two different lines to vote two different times at the same precinct?
That's what we were told, yes, sir.
All right.
All right, Mr. Rose, you still have the floor.
No, the only thing I wanted to add was what has already been stated previously, is that, to me, this issue really centers around what state law, and it kind of boxes this council in where we are mandated to fund the office at a certain level, but have no oversight, hiring, firing, authority, and even authority to inspect the finances. And it's not fair to the Election Commission, it's not fair to this council, and it's not fair to the citizens of Richland County. And so that's why it's difficult for this council to determine what is actually needed, because we are forced to fund but have no authority whatsoever. And so I just wanted to put that out there.
All right, thank you, Mr. Rose. Mr. Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At the winner of the special election will be seated by council after the general election on July 19th. Will there be a general election, or will there have to be someone at the people at the polling station, even though there's no opposition? There still has to be a general election, as I was told. So even though there will not be an opposition, will the precincts has to be staffed?
For the
special election.
Special
right?
election.
The general election date is July 19th.
Right.
And the winner of the special election cannot be seated until after the special the general election for the
Right.
special election on July 19th by
Yeah.
council also. So my question is that I'd just like to find out,
Right.
just like any elections, like the primaries in June, the general is in November, you don't have opposition, but the names on the ballot you can have writing also. So I just like to know if we'll have to have someone at the precincts or staff at the precincts by
Right.
state law.
Right. And Mr. Jackson and Mr. Chairman, that's a very good question, and I don't know the answer to that. Of course, the election itself, if it has to be held, would be in July, so it would be in the next fiscal year. So as far as funding, it wouldn't impact what we're doing here, but that's a very good question because I don't know.
I just would like that to surprise us and come up and saying you have to have a general election.
Right.
And by the law, because you have to, that council person cannot be seated even though
Right.
there may be no opposition until after
Exactly.
the July 19th general election.
Yeah, exactly. Again, that's a very good question. I'm sure Mr. Self could answer that right away, but I'm not sure, but I will find out.
Well, just a question we'd like to
Yes, sir.
answer for the budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Mr. Pierce.
Mr. Chairman, respectfully, they seem to be more questions than we have answers. Mr. Self is not here. This is a third reading item. I think I have questions that myself,
Defer.
and I believe that if we deferred this one meeting, that it would not be a problem, and we asked Mr. Self to please be here at the next meeting. So I would make a motion to defer this for one meeting only.
I'll second it.
I got a motion for deferral. It's been properly second. Deferral's non-debatable. All in favor of deferral signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
That motion carries. Next, we have first reading items. Item 25, an ordinance authorizing the issuance of sale of not to exceed $29 million of general fund obligation bond series 2016A or such other appropriate series designation of Richland County, South Carolina, fixing the form and details of the bonds, delegating to county administrator certain authority related to the bonds, providing for the payment of the bonds and the disposition of the proceeds thereof, and other matters relating thereto. Chair, entertain a motion.
Move approval, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to speak to the motion.
Got a motion for approval.
Second.
It's been properly second. Discussion. Mr. Pierce.
Mr. McDonald, could you please advise, it's my understanding this is our regular bond issue for the capital items that were approved in the FY 15-16 budget. Is that correct?
Not exactly, Mr. Pierce. This is our bond issue. Well, let me go back just a step. Actually, the next four items, 25, 26, 27, and 28, are the beginning by title of the budget process. This gives first reading, if you approve them, it gives first reading to item 25, which would be our annual capital bond issue based on the amount of capacity that we've determined to exist for the upcoming fiscal year. Now, don't be confused by the $29 million number. A portion of that, of our annual bond issue, is recurring items like sheriff's vehicles. We roll that from year to year in a bond. Ambulances, we roll that from year to year in a bond. Building improvements, we do that annually in a bond. So a lot of that $29 million is already going to be tied up in recurring items, again, that we do each year. So, but all this does is simply put the ball into motion to, as we go through the budget process, to have you discuss what the bond issue may look like, or even if you want to approve a bond issue, because this year, for example, you approved the recurring items, but you did not approve the additional capacity, which was $8 million. And you may remember that figure. We've talked about it off and on since last year. So again, this does not commit you to anything. This does not commit you to any projects. All it does, again, is get the ball rolling for the annual capital bond, and then the next one would be, well, I'll talk about the next one in just a minute.
So this is a prospective.
Yes.
And we issue the maximum capacity, but it does not mean at this time that we will be issuing $29 million. That would be what we would be allowed under the formula.
That is what
So
you...
it's actually prospective, not, okay.
It is prospective, and you can issue any amount less than that, or again, you can issue nothing if you desire to.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you, Mr. Pierce. Any more discussion? This is a first reading item. All in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Item 26, an ordinance authorizing the issuance of a sale of not to exceed $15.5 million of Broad River Sewer System General Obligation Refunding Bond Series 2016B or such other appropriate series designation of Richland County, South Carolina, fixing the form and details of the bond, delegating to the county administrator certain authority related to the bonds, providing for the payment of the bonds and disposition of the proceeds thereof, and other matters relating thereto. Chair, entertain a motion.
Move for us, Chair.
Got a motion for approval. It's been properly second. Any discussion? Mr. Malinowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have requested some additional financial information from Assistant Administrator Harley, and until I receive that and discuss this in more detail with him, I'm going to vote nay on it, so it doesn't wind up on the consent agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Malinowski. Any more discussion? This is a first reading item. All in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
That motion carries. Item 27, an ordinance to raise revenue, make appropriations, and adopt a budget for Richland County, South Carolina fiscal year beginning July 1, 2016, and ending July 30th, 2017. This is a first reading by title only.
Move approval.
Got a motion for approval. It's been properly second. Any discussion? First reading item. All in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye. First
Any-
reading by title only.
By title only. Any opposed, like sign? That motion carries. Item 28, an ordinance authorizing the levying of ad valorem property taxes, which together with the prior year's carryover and other state levies and any additional amount appropriated by Richland County Council prior to July 1, 2016, will provide sufficient revenues for operations of Richland County government during the period of July 1, 2016 through June 30th, 2017. This is the first reading item by title only. Chair, entertain a motion.
Move approval.
Got a motion for approval? Got a motion for approval. It's been properly second. Any discussion? All in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Next, we have the report of the Administration and Finance Committee. Mr. Pierce.
Yes, sir. Item 29, we've already covered. Item number 30 is a motion that came before the Administration and Finance Committee, recommended by Mr. Malinowski. The recommendation came forward from the committee that we approve proceeding with working with our legislative delegation to widen the scope of allowable uses of hospitality tax revenues to provide the county with greater flexibility, which could prove useful in funding other items not specifically outlined in the current legislation. That came forward with the recommendation for approval. It was not unanimous, but the motion is for approval.
All right, you heard the committee's recommendation. Any discussion? Can you state that recommendation again?
It's,
Yeah, I'm sorry.
The whole thing?
No, just the last part. It's approval?
It's for approval to work with the legislative delegation to try to widen the scope of the hospitality taxes.
All right, thank you. Discussion, Ms. Dickerson.
This is a very complicated issue. We've been through this before, I think, been down this road before. We are only trying to get the legislative delegation to let us, allow us to use hospitality tax at our discretion? At our discretion.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Dickerson. Any more discussion? This is a one reading item?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, that's not a...
All in favor of that motion signify by raising your hand.
In favor, Rose, Malinowski, Dixon, Jackson, Pierce, Livingston, Dickerson, Manning, Jeter.
Any opposed? Like sign?
Opposed, Rush.
That motion carries. Item,
Okay, item...
Mr. Pierce.
Item number 31, the Conservation Department Project Agreement with City of Columbia for Owensville Park Construction. This is an item that has been previously approved by council. It's taken quite a while to get it, I think, back to where it needs to be. And there was a question in the committee, I believe Mr. Malinowski raised, about the relationship between the city and the county on this project, that if they did not pay their portion, would we be responsible for the balance? I believe that was the question you raised. Is that not correct? So with that coming forward, the committee decided to send the item forward without a recommendation.
okay, there's no committee recommendation. Chair, entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Got a motion for approval. That's been properly second. Any discussion?
Oh,
Ms. Dickerson.
so if they don't, we don't have to do it, right? The city? Can you amend that? Because, please amend it, because you know I have a question about.
The county, correct? On this,
That's right.
There's no financial impact. I move to approve, and we shall not be responsible, with the caveat that we're not responsible for any other entity's funding. Does that suffice?
So you just make an amendment to your motion?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the council's already approved the funding.
Yeah.
The funding is already
Yes,
there?
ma'am. It's already been approved.
Okay.
Previous.
Mr. Malinowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'm sorry. Ms. Dickerson, you still have it.
Contingent upon the cities, is it contingent upon the city putting their part in there? Is that the way I read that?
And that was the concern.
So if they don't put theirs and we put ours and the project is not finished, then who's gonna finish the project? Richland County.
Are you done, Ms. Dickerson?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Ms. Dickerson.
I just
Mr.
wanted to
Malinowski.
put that out there so everybody know if we have to get stuck with it and they don't pay, we gonna end up paying.
And that's, mine kind of dovetails off Ms. Dickerson's here, where it says in this project agreement, it says, "The county acknowledges that the project budget is accurate and sufficient to complete the project plans." But 2 paragraphs later, it says, "The city does not guarantee completion of the project within the budget."
That's why I
So
raised
we got
it.
one group saying, yeah, this is right, we can do it, and another group saying we can't do it. Now, with that conflicting information, it seems to me somebody's not sure it's going to be completed within budget.
State your name and, okay, go ahead.
Quentin Epps, Conservation Department. The confusion is that there's 2 parts to the project. There's a city part and a county part. And both of these have the funding that has been allocated, one by the city and one by the county. And the county is not responsible for paying the city portion, and the city is not responsible for paying the county portion. And in the agreement, if you look down past the part where it says that the city does not guarantee, let me see what it says exactly, does not guarantee completion of the project within the project budget, that is because the city is procuring the project and they don't want to be held responsible for the county's portion. In the next sentence, it says, if actual construction cost is reflected in the low bid or over budget, the city will work with the county and the GCWA to revise the project's plans as necessary to bring the costs within the funds currently allocated for the project. So that protects both the city and the county, because the county's not procuring the project, the city is. Now, it is a bit confusing.
Yeah.
But again, it says that the city will work with the county to revise the project plans as necessary, which means we may not wind up getting the same thing that you're attesting to, that there's enough funds in here to complete the county portion of the budget. And the city is saying there may not be, and if there is not, because we're in charge, that is, the city's in charge of this project, then they're going to get with you and tell you, guess what? This is what you're not getting because we don't think you put enough funds in.
One moment. Mr. Smith, you had clarification?
I'm gonna try to do the best I can. I think that if you look at the ROA that came through, we had some concerns and questions about the actual document that you have before you now that purports to be the proposed agreement. And I think that what we said is that we wanted to work with Mr. Epps and the city to make the appropriate changes to the agreement consistent with what we think the terms and conditions of the agreement ought to be to protect the county. And so your motion, I would ask, would include allowing us to continue to do that.
Yeah.
You done, Mr. Malinowski?
Yes, thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Malinowski. Mr. Rose?
No, I just want to clarify, this no financial impact to the county with what we're doing. The money's already been allocated, and what is being, if there are issues that come about, you can bring it back to us, correct?
That is correct.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Rose. Any more discussion? So the motion on the table, Ms. Rose?
Was to approve with the caveat that we'd only be responsible for our portion and no other portion.
All right, and that's been properly
And
seconded.
legal stays involved.
And bringing it back, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and I second that, yeah.
Is this a one reading item?
I believe so.
Okay, all in favor of that motion signify by raising your hand.
In favor, Rose, Malinowski, Dixon, Jackson, Pierce, Rush, Livingston, Dickerson, Manning.
Any opposed, like sign? That motion carries. Mr. Pierce?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Item number 32 has to do with release of funds. These funds would be used for the dredging of Lake Catherine. This item actually came before council 2 or 3 years ago, at which time a study had been done of the silt buildup in Lake Catherine, and percentages of responsibility for that were assigned to various entities: the city, the county, DOT, and Forest Acres. At that time, council took action and appropriated funds for our portion of that, but the project did not move forward because one of the other entities opted not to provide their funds. So what has happened during the meantime is the problem has continued to get worse. Of course, the flood has now exacerbated it to the point that the water is being significantly impeded. The city has now agreed to, because of the seriousness of it, would be to pick up that portion of the funding that one of the other entities wasn't going to pay, and that our percentage of it is 8%. It's 8% of the problem. Now, they have the wrong number listed in the document here. They have it reported in the document that you have before you at $52,000. Mr. Harley, what is 8% of the actual cost going to be, please?
Warren Harley.
That's actually less than you appropriated the first time, so.
Warren Harley, Assistant County Administrator. After conversations with the city, their projected possible high-end number is $780,000.
That's for the total project.
It's total project. Yes, I'm sorry. Total project for the sediment removal, and so the portion that we would be responsible for that would be 62.4, I believe. It equates to that 8%.
The money for this is in the bank. It was paid on an EPA stormwater settlement. We actually got half of a $238,000 settlement, so there's $119,000 in the bank available for this type of action. So we're asking that money, that the $62,000 be, or 8% of the total, no more than $62,000, be released from that account to pay for this. And that's the motion. It did not, what did the committee the committee recommended approval of this item, but it was not unanimous. So the motion is for approval.
Okay, the motion from the committee is for approval. Discussion. Mr. Malinowski and Ms. Dickerson.
Hey, Mr. Chair, and the only thing I would like to point out also is on page 275, legal indicates about a collaborative effort and done pursuant to an intergovernmental agreement. So that's part of this motion.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Malinowski. Ms. Dickerson.
Mr. I don't know Mr. Chair, who I direct my question to, make my statement to. You say this silt buildup has been exacerbated by the flood. Is that correct? Huh?
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Dickerson, yes, in my conversation with a representative from the city, they believe that it could have been made worse by the October flooding. They haven't verified all of that yet, but they're working to do so.
And this is a private lake?
I think it is owned by the homeowners association in this case.
Is owned by the homeowners association, and we're getting ready now to approve $62,000 approximately for this huh?
No, Ms. Dickerson, you still have the floor.
All right. So we're getting ready to appropriate $62,000 that's out of 100 and some thousand that's been appropriated for this project. Huh?
No, ma'am, the total project is $700 and something thousand.
I got $780,000.
That was the total project.
Total project, and you're telling me
we agreed 2 years ago to pay our percentage since the county created the damage, and that's where you get the 8% of the total amount of the project.
the county created the problem.
8% of the 8% of the damage was created by the county.
Ms. Dickerson, you still have the floor.
And this is and like I said, this is a HOA, and it's not open to the public. And we exacerbated the problem, 8% of the problem, and now we're gonna release $62,000 for this, and the funds are there. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
So I'm gonna say this: I have a project that's got this same scenario, and that's where we are with this, and the funds are there. So. Do you want me to be in your office tomorrow?
Always welcome.
Well, I'm just saying, I mean, I don't see any different from this project than that project. So I'm gonna have to vote no on this one.
All right, thank you, Ms. Dickerson. Any more discussion? Mr. Jackson.
Mr. Chair, so you're saying the county has some funds available for sediment buildup?
Yes, sir. Tony?
Yeah. Mr. Jackson, the money that's being referred to, the $119,000, that was, as Mr. Pierce indicated, a part of a settlement agreement between the City of Columbia and DHEC from a few years back when when the City of Columbia was fined for some stormwater violations. And anytime the state or DHEC charges or fines a municipality, the governing body of the county receives half of that fine back from DHEC. So we received half of it, and the total fine, as Mr. Pierce indicated, was $238. So the county's half was $119,000, which came back to the county. Now, those funds, you can do different things with them, but they have to be used for stormwater improvement. They can't be used for other things that are not related to stormwater management.
I understand. I just want some of my colleagues may understand that sediment buildup, whether it's on a private lake or not, can be caused from runoff contributed to it from maybe the state roads, city or county roads. So it has nothing to do with private. It's a buildup that can be caused from external from roads and different entities draining on the property.
And
So
just
I
for
just want to clarify.
Mrs. Chair?
Clarify.
I was going to point out that that breakout of that table and the study that was done is on page 304. I don't know if you've seen that, but it allocates the percent of the total sediment load that corresponds.
Yeah, I know is why I'm just asking this question. We have a lot of problem in Lower Richland over the years. I've been asking where you have a lot of lakes has been filled up with silt from improper runoff from outfall ditches and not properly cleaning these outfall ditches, and there's been a lot of buildup. There have been any action, but I just wanted to some of my colleagues to understand, and from Ms. Dickerson's comment, just wanted to understand that whether it's private or not, it doesn't matter. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Jackson. Ms. Dickerson.
Thank you, my esteemed colleague. I understand that. That is not what I'm alluding to. This is totally different, and I can understand what you're saying, and that we prove that this silt come from runoffs from ditches and things like that. Is that what this thing? Is that the way I read this, Mr. Holly? That this silt comes from runoffs from stormwater drainage and all of this?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dickerson. Any more discussion? This is a one reading item. All in favor of that motion signify by saying aye. I'm sorry, by raising your hand.
Favor. Rose, Dixon, Malinowski, Jackson, Pierce, Rush, Livingston, Manning, Jeter.
Any opposed, like sign?
Opposed, Dickerson.
That motion carries. Mr. Pierce.
Report of the A&F.
Thank you, Mr. Pierce. Next, we have the report of the Economic Development Committee. Mr. Livingston.
Mr. Chair, item 33, the committee is asking for your approval for first reading for item 33. That refers to putting property in an industrial park. The property that we're referring to, as you'll see on page 313, we're talking about the development at Fars Acres. The committee will bring back, hopefully have an executive session on this matter at our next meeting, but request first reading by title only for this meeting.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Livingston. You heard the committee's recommendation. Discussion, Mr. Malinowski.
We're on 33A.
33A, that's correct.
Well, nowhere does it say title only, it says first reading.
But that's why I made that statement, yes.
So it will be title only?
Yes.
Tied on.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Malinowski. Ms. Dickerson.
We got a name. We're gonna get the name in the executive session?
There's no name of a project. We're just simply putting a Fars Acres property into the multi-county park.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Dickerson. Any more discussion? This is the first reading item. All in favor of that item?
Title only.
Title only. All in favor of that item signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. Next item, Mr. Livingston.
The chair, item 33A, B, authorizing the conversion of a 1966 fee in lieu agreement arrangement by and between South Carolina and Bose Corporation and other matters related thereof. What this is, you may recall that the Bose Corporation is actually shutting down. They have a fee in lieu agreement with us. What we want to do is, the committee want to do is extend that agreement, which makes it easier for them to sell that property. So once the property is sold, there's a company located there, they'd have to come back to us and ask for an agreement and so forth. We think it'd be easy to get rid of the property and establish some new business there. So the committee's recommendation for first reading approval is to move forward to extend that fee in lieu.
Okay, you heard the committee's recommendation. Any discussion? All in favor, it's first reading. All in favor of that motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. Mr. Livingston.
Mr. Chair, that completes the report of the Economic Development Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Livingston. Next, we have the report of the Rules and Appointments Committee. Mr. Malinowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And we are here, Rules and Appointment Committee, there we go. All right, number 34, Animal Care Advisory Committee. 2 vacancies. The committee, we have some committee members that I believe will have to recuse themselves on a couple of these votes, and they can do so at the time of a vote, but the committee recommends to appoint Tracy Wales and Nicole Howland.
Okay, you heard the committee's recommendation. Any discussion? All in favor of that recommendation?
Chairman, I'm recusing myself on that vote.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Manning. All in favor of the committee's recommendation signify by raising your hand.
In favor, Rose, Malinowski, Dixon, Jackson, Pierce, Rush, Livingston, Dickerson, Jeter.
Any opposed, like sign? That motion carries. Mr. Malinowski.
Item number 35, Board of Assessment Appeals. The committee recommends to reappoint Mr. John Kosowski.
Okay, you heard the committee's recommendation. Any discussion? All in favor of that recommendation signify by raising your hand.
In favor, Rose, Malinowski, Dixon, Jackson, Pierce, Rush, Livingston, Dickerson, Manning, Jeter.
Any opposed, like sign? That motion carries. Mr. Malinowski.
Item number 36, Board of Zoning Appeals. The committee recommends to reappoint Mr. Frank Richardson and appoint Mr. Jason C. McLeese.
Okay, you heard the committee's recommendation. Ms. Dixon.
I have to recuse myself from this one.
All right, thank you, Ms. Dixon. You heard the committee's recommendation. All in favor of that recommendation signify by raising your hand.
In favor, Rose, Malinowski, Jackson, Pierce, Rush, Livingston, Dickerson, Manning, Jeter.
Any opposed, like sign?
And that
motion
concludes my
carries.
report, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Malinowski. Next, we have the report of the Ordinance Review Ad Hoc Committee. Mr. Malinowski, Ms. Dixon, I'm sorry. Y'all attached.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item number 37. I spoke with planning staff and moved to approve first reading on the ordinance amending the Richland County Code of Ordinance, Chapter 26, Land Development, Article number 6, Supplement Use Standards, Section 26-152, Special Exception, Subsection D, Standard, Paragraph 22, Radio, Television, and Other Transmission Tower, Subparagraph C, Clause 1, so as to amend the setback requirements for tower abutting residential zone parcel. Any questions or any proposed change can be addressed at our zoning and public hearing meeting on the 24th of this month.
So your motion is,
Approval.
I got a motion on the table for approval. Any discussion?
Question, have this item gone before the planning commission?
Yes.
The motion on the table is for approval.
Approval.
Any more discussion? All in favor of the approval signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries.
That concludes my report.
Thanks, Ms. Dixon. Next, we have citizen input must pertain to items not on the agenda. Mr. Forrester. You didn't have to sign up this time. I remembered you.
I am Tony Forrester. I live at 822 Woodside Avenue. In the story I was telling you last that I was had reported drug dealers on the corner, and I had called the police, and the police next day was up there. When I passed by, they was laughing with the drug dealers. So the next day when I went to work, which is 2 blocks from Hyatt Park, where Ridgewood Avenue, where I was living on, and Hyatt Park is 2 blocks over. The next day when I went to work, I was telling KP, the director, of what's happening, how the drugs around there and what the drug dealers and the Bloods were doing to me. And he told me, well, why you just won't leave? I said, no, it's time for the drug dealers to leave. I'm not moving. So when I turned around, there was a major drug dealer, which I know him very well, and he was a Blood. Evidently, he went and told everybody else. So it kind of escalated where I was at the house. So they started ganging up every night. It was like 20 of them. So I said, okay, they're gonna make war against me, I'm gonna make war on all of them. So the next day when I went to work, which I had to get somebody, I was so scared at that time that I had somebody to pick me up to take me to work and somebody to bring me home, my co-workers. And I was so scared at the time that, you know, it was very fearful. So I went to the precinct, the city police precinct on Monticello Road across the street from Hyatt Park. I went up there and they sent me to a second floor, I believe, to a detective department because I told them that I wanted to report drug dealers. So when I was talking to him that I wanted to report drug dealers, everybody in the room just got quiet. It got so quiet that I looked around because it kind of scared me. And not only was it a drug dealer that I had reported that was black, there was one white guy that was living across the street from me. He was one also, so I reported him. And the next day, when I came back to work, KP said, I don't know what you did to the police, but you got all of them over there hating you. Couldn't find out, I heard that he was an undercover for the police department. So everything really escalated then. And was that my time?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I move unanimous consent for 2 more minutes of the story.
All right.
Well, we
Mr.
got to
Furst.
figure out how many more 2 minutes he got.
All right.
Okay.
Continue, Mr. Forrest.
Okay. That time it escalated real bad, and everybody was starting to come at night. They were still ganging up at night, calling me out, and I wouldn't go out until the next day. I went home, I stayed in, would not come out until somebody picked me up the next day to go to work. And I had to have somebody escort me to the store and everything. And what happened was, one day I started renting a car because I could no longer walk and I couldn't keep getting people to take me here and there. So I started renting a car. And I would get in the car and I would go. And one night when I came home, I had a padlock as well as a lock on my door. The padlock was broken. And I looked at it. I didn't have a cell phone. This is year 2005. I didn't have a cell phone at that time. And I said, I'm not going in there. So I went to the A1 store on the corner and they had a phone booth. And I called the police. The police came there, and it was a bunch of drug dealers on the corner where I had reported. And when the police came to go in the door, to go inside, all the drug dealers were waving, hollering, don't go in, don't go in, don't go in. The police looked at me and said, I got to go. He jumped in his car and he left. I had to go back to the A1 store and call the police again. And I was told him what had happened, and he said he was gonna send somebody else back. So by the time he sent somebody else back, whoever was in there was gone. And he came in the apartment and he checked. Clothes were thrown everywhere like somebody had been in there searching or something. And after that, he made a report. And I guess that's my time. I just
All right.
tell you the rest of the story when I get back.
Thank you, Mr. Forrest.
See you next week.
All right. That concludes our citizens' input. Other items? Next, we have executive session. Chair, entertain a motion for executive. Well, can you state your items for executive session, Mr. Smith?
Mr. Chairman, I think you have one item under your report, which is a personnel matter related to the report of the search committee.
Okay.
Shouldn't be very long.
All right. Chair, entertain a motion for executive session. Okay, a motion for executive session has been properly second. Discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. We're in executive session.